program today is being presented by the Montevallo Study Club in conjunction with their 90th anniversary as an organization. And for some of us who grew up here, our mothers were members of the study club, and my mother was, and so I'm rather familiar with it. And but I don't know that much about it. All I know is it was something my mother went to. And so we have with us today Maggie Hall, who's the president, and Melanie Poole, who's the vice president. And so I will turn the floor over to them, and we'll find out something about the Montevallo Study Club.
Thank you. I did check our list, our roll list, and your mother is on there.
Yeah.
So you're not just making that up. So in 1976, Pulitzer Prize winning historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich coined the phrase, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." She said seldom because the exception for the last 90 years has been the Montevallo Study Club. Under the guise of hats, gloves, and china, we have been carefully shaping the history of our community. Good afternoon. I am Maggie Hall, the current president of the Montevallo Study Club, and with me in the back is Melanie Poole, our vice president. I am beyond proud today to share with you a glimpse of our history. So the Study Club held its first official meeting on November the 1st, 1933, with 17 young women. To quote Todd Jeter when she spoke in 1968, "This was a real indication of the type of membership this club had then, and I hope still has. These founding members were not sticklers for non-essentials, because the meeting held on November the 1st was the October meeting." She went on to say, "As I see it, the most important factor of the club is an intangible factor. The members more or less have formed a sorority. They might go weeks without seeing each other, but the fact that we belong to the study club gives us a feeling of belonging and sharing. And each member feels a real and genuine interest in every other member." From that first meeting in 1933 to today, the club has stood for community and personal improvement. As the second youngest member of the club, it is hard for me to imagine a Montevallo in which my right to be independent and make choices for myself regarding education, career, family, so much more were questioned. So at a time when information didn't flow as freely as it does today, the study club was formed to promote, quote, "the intellectual development and social discourse of its members and to create an active interest in civil affairs." Over the years, we have continued with what Emily Pendleton called our 3 S's: study, socialize, and serve. There have been, of course, yearly benefit bridge parties, Christmas parties, trips, socializing throughout the years. But for y'all, I would like to detail some of our significant impact on the community. I agree with Georgine Watson when she said in 1983, "When I reviewed it, I was literally bursting with pride at all the accomplishments of the club." Did you know, although in this group y'all probably did know, I didn't know, that Shelby County had the largest percentage of polio vaccination of any county in our state? Because the Montevallo Study Club initially started a drive for polio shots by having each one of our members promise to get theirs. And then when that worked, they grew to trying to have everybody in Montevallo 40 and under immunized. The County Medical Society heard about that effort and asked us to enlarge the drive to the whole county. Every doctor in the county, as well as many of the nurses, volunteered a full day giving shots. At one point, they had to commission a flying trip, which you know back then was a much bigger deal, to obtain more vaccines because we did such an effective job. One of our members was even named the Polio Mother of the Year. The club sponsored drives for the Red Cross, and on one occasion, donors had to be turned away because the Red Cross ran out of containers. We started a maternal welfare fund and a birth control clinic in cooperation with local doctors. The club sponsored a wildly successful mental health drive to raise both funds and awareness. Both of those were done, by the way, in the early years of the club, and thus it was well ahead of the times. Numerous individuals have been helped over the years with medical needs, dental and optometric treatments, clothing, ambulance services, even vegetable seeds for indigent cases. Goodfellow boxes, bless you, with food, fruit, candy, toys used to be handed out at the Alice Boyd building. Unfortunately, it was done in the winter when the heat had been turned off to the building. So we have several accounts of people complaining that they couldn't feel their feet after they were done handing out the boxes. For many years, we sponsored an annual Christmas party at Bryce Hospital. So in the early years, that involved a physical trip to Tuscaloosa, which later evolved into adopting a ward and then sending funds for their party. So Todd Jeter told this story about when she showed up at Bryce and she proudly gave about 20 stuffed animals to an attendant. And then later discovered he was actually a patient and had lined all 20 stuffed animals up in his room. So some of the women went and they carried on sometimes, a one-sided conversation with ease, while some of the others kind of cringed in a corner. And most of the early members had stories that they share from those trips to Bryce. But the common thread in all of those amusing or not amusing tales is the realization that any one of us could easily be those patients, and that it's the circumstances that each of us is given in life that makes that difference. We have ensured a happy Christmas for patients at the Veterans Hospital, the Partlow Center, Shelby Memorial Hospital, Briarcliff, the list goes on. Education has consistently remained a focus for our club. Long before there was a federal free lunch program, we paid for meals and textbooks for students. In 1937, we started a scholarship fund that even in those early years was awarded to both white and black students who were deserving. Benefiting the local schools was also a focus through items like band uniforms, instruments. We gifted the elementary school their first World Globe, improved lighting for the schools, books, student art exhibits, and so much more. The Girl Scouts particularly benefited for decades from the study club, and many of our members led individual troops, and then several of them served as local commissioner. Another big focus has been the beautification of our town. In the beginning, the study club planted rose bushes at the entrances to the city. With the cooperation of the Studiosus Club, we installed the first Christmas decorations downtown, and for 30 years, the Montevallo Study Club is who erected the big lighted Christmas tree downtown. Originally, we sponsored a citywide cleanup campaign, which later became an annual event promoted by the city officials. As Georgine Watson said when she concluded her 1968 program, "I don't know about your halo, but mine needs pushing back from my eyes. We are not through, ladies. The best is yet to come." She was brilliant. As I said before, one of the biggest and most impactful aims of the study club is the intellectual development of our members. So now I will turn this over to our Vice President, Melanie Poole, who, among other things, is going to show you the various programs that we have had through the years.
Thanks, Maggie. And if you don't mind, I'm going to dim the lights a little for our show. Clay, do you mind?
No, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to do the switch up front, too. Y'all don't fall asleep if I do this, okay? All right. I don't know where this
I
goes.
think that one over there will turn these off.
Yay!
Oh.
Good. Who's that popcorn? And I'm going to give the presentation from back here because my notes are on the laptop. So as Maggie said, this year we are celebrating our 90th anniversary. And this is our 1933 yearbook. Officers were Mrs. L.E. Wright, Mrs. F.P. Devan, Mrs. E.E. Craig, and Mrs. Paul Rogan. And our club studied travel. "17 married women were founding members, and you will recognize many longtime Montevallo families among them."
No, not a chance. Can you read?
Testing your eyesight today.
Yes.
Our studies took us to Holland, Italy, France, Germany, Great Britain, Spain, Russia, and Norway/Sweden. Travel was a frequent theme for the club. The cost to print yearbooks in 1935 was $7. Mrs. Parnell was elected secretary, and the treasurer reported a balance of $1.59 in the bank.
No one.
Whoops, I think I missed one. I don't like laptops. There we go. The welfare committee reported that $18 was collected for the bridge party, and some is still to be turned in. An amendment was made to the Constitution, setting dues at $2, $1 payable in October and $1 in January. An appeal was made from the child welfare chairman from the American Legion Auxiliary, asking for help caring for needy children. A motion was made that each member make a personal donation of 25 cents. In 1936, the Welfare Committee reported that $5 was spent for groceries for a family in Strayman, and $15 was turned over to Miss Brooke for eye treatment for 3 children. Membership for the 1936-1937 club year is a little fuzzy since there are 2 differing records in the archives. But it would appear that Mrs. Heath and Mrs. Craig left the club and Mrs. Kennerly and Mrs. Gilbert joined. The highlight of the 1940s was the Gay 90s Review, which was presented by the club in both November of 1941 and January of 1948. The performance was held in Palmer Hall and cost 25 cents. It included beautiful girlies, the Florodora Sextet, dazzling dancers, singing waiters, and a barbershop quartet. I'm sure this is Montevallo. A note in the program requests that the audience not throw fruit, vegetables, or eggs at the actors, as it might hurt the stage sets. Don't worry about the actors. Applause for entertainment and hissing of villains is welcomed. All ladies will please remove their hats and be careful of sticking their hat pins in others. The management requests all stage door Johnnies not to bother the Florodora girls at the end of the performance. From the credits, it appears that all the members of the Montevallo Study Club were in the Gay 90s cast, and making special appearances were some husbands, including Mr. Kennerly, Mr. Gavan, Dr. Jackson, and Mr. Mahaffey, as well as a few more names you may recognize, Dr. Knox, Dr. Orr, and Mr. Mayman. A few names of note from the 1948 performance included escorts to the Florodora Sextet, W.H. Trumbauer, Raymond Fowler, Frank Philpott, Clayton Norton, Owen Wise, and Stanley Mahan. Did you know that about your dad, Clay?
Yep.
Leaving the very exciting 1940s behind, the 1950s brought a benefit bridge party to Reynolds Hall and a new study club cookbook. The ladies were applauded for promoting worthwhile legislation in Alabama, including opposition to the Cooper Bill, which would repeal the poll tax, and a bill which would eliminate the operations of loan sharks. Mrs. Sarah Jeter Phillips reported on education in Shelby County from 1819 to the present day, and Mrs. Ralph Sears presented schools of the future. Oops. Clay, I hate this laptop, by the way. In 1956, club members contributed toward the transportation of children to the speech clinic in Montevallo and gave $25 to the Shelby County March of Dimes. Come on, button works. There we go. Club members also also contributed to Radio Free Europe and the Free Europe Press, purchasing 3 minutes of airtime for the distribution of truth and hope to oppressed people behind the Iron Curtain. In 1958, the club sponsored a Red Cross funds drive which collected $650 in contributions. They also sponsored a city cleanup. 1958 officers were Mrs. F.M. Morgan, Mrs. T.E. Watson, Mrs. R.W. Sears, Mrs. N.E. Phillips, and Mrs. A.C. Anderson. Plans were made to celebrate the club's 25th anniversary on October 28, 1958. Pictured at the 25th anniversary celebration were charter members Mrs. Craig, Mrs. Phillips, Mrs. Holcomb, Mrs. Gavan, Mrs. Jeter, Mrs. Rogan, Mrs. Wills, and Mrs. Frost. A few names of note from the 1948 performance. Well, we already saw that one. In the 1950s, we studied such topics as the home, present-day trends in thinking and living, national defense, the importance of being an alert citizen, conservation, women in health, women in finance, the theater today, art, educational television in Alabama, what's new in medicine, a study of cooperative religions, mental health in schools, and early colonial days in America. By 1960, there were 22 members in the Montevallo Study Club. In 1960, Alabama club women, including members of the Montevallo Study Club, attended workshops on divorce law, jury service for women, antiquated family laws, benefits for schools, libraries and mental institutions, and sterilization of mental deficients. At the March meeting, the program given by Dr. D.R. McMillan was What's New in Science and Industry. Other topics of discussion in the 1960s included what we can do to stay mentally healthy, drama at Oak Mountain State Park, and a book review of The Constant Circle by G.L. Mencken. The club also launched a fundraising drive for mental health and made mental health their program of study for the 1960-61 year. In lieu of the December meeting, the club will give a Christmas party at Rice Hospital for patients. This would be the first of many such parties held at the club, by the club at Rice Hospital. A grand celebration of our club's 35th anniversary was held in March of 1968. Charter members were invited to attend. Club President Mrs. Albert Scott and Mrs. M. Thornton posed with the beautifully decorated cake. A few names of note from the 1948 performance. Oh, we already saw that one. I'm a Mac person, guys. This PC is driving me crazy. In the 1960s, we studied such topics as mental health in Alabama, civil defense, labor unions, antique glass in China, the music of Mexico, flower arranging, how to help your child prepare for college, wives of the presidents, the Appalachia, Operation Head Start, the movies, sex education, and campus capers. I hope those two didn't go side by side. Pictured in this group photo from 1976 are Ann Parker, Mabel Thornton, Helen Kirkland, Eleanor Lewis, Jean Sledge, Augusta Lovelady, Francis Anthony, Sue Wilkinson, Joyce Orr, Martha Walters, Carolyn Scott, Todd Jeter, Georgine Watson, Lori Binion, Ann Kelly, Maggie Anderson, Charlene Scott, Mary Lee Brown, and Dean Matthews. The photo was taken at King House as the club presented a sunbonnet quilt made by members to the University of Montevallo. A remembrance of Georgine Watson. Of all the hundreds of contributions this club has made through the years, the one that made a lasting impression on me was our yearly trips to Bryce, where we sponsored a Christmas party for one of the women's wards. A few names, let's see. There we go, come on now. There we In the 70s, we studied such topics as a look at Southern dialect, the King House restoration, the latest consumer tips, diet, politics, arts and crafts, women at home, the way it was, home remedies, cemeteries, the development of Moore Park, superstitions and sayings, Montevallo personalities, and city government. The 1980s brought history, politics, and community betterment to the Montevallo Study Club. In November, Judge Patty Smith and Mrs. Carly Best spoke to members about their experiences in the political arena. That same month, the club placed the history of Montevallo on the shelves of the city library. The history was compiled over 2 years by club members. In December 1980, the study club joined with the Montevallo Garden Club in landscaping the grounds around the recreation building in Moore Park. A story in the January 1981 Birmingham News told of the December 1980 landscaping project undertaken by the study club and garden club. Among the programs undertaken in 1981 were continuing education, the collected stories of Eudora Welty, and cancer. Club president was Mrs. A.G. Kelly. The main focus of the 1983-84 study club year was the club's golden anniversary. President-elect Mrs. Eugene Sledge led a discussion to formulate plans. Mrs. J.A. Kelly and Mrs. T.W. Lewis pardon me, were co-committee chairmen of the planning committee. The 50th anniversary celebration was held October 25th, 1983 in Reynolds Hall. 19 members and 7 charter members were among those in attendance. In recognition of its 50th anniversary, the Montevallo Study Club presented 10 volumes to the Parnell Memorial Library to be added to a historical collection already established by the club. Mrs. J.A. Brown made the presentation and recognized Mr. Pat Kelly and Mr. A.G. Kelly for their gift to the library of a special cabinet to house the collection. The club is binding copies of the Montevallo Times and Shelby County Herald that were donated to the library by the Wyatt family. A very special discussion was held in January 1984 after the club listened to UN Professor Eugene Sledge tell what combat was like for Marines in World War II. And the 1985-86 study club year was devoted to the arts. Dr. Frank McCoy kicked off the series with a video from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. The life and works of Picasso was the topic of discussion in February 1987. The UN performance of the Magic Flute was the program for the March meeting. Having completed a 2-year study of the arts, the study club made a significant contribution to arts activities at the University of Montevallo, including the Artist in Residency program for middle and elementary schools, the production of The Messiah, and helping Parnell Memorial Library and the Main Street Players. A tea was held for the 55th anniversary of the Montevallo Study Club. Books were donated to the library in 1988, and fun was had by all at the study club Christmas party at Flower Hill in 1989. And as a recap, in the 1980s, we studied such topics as changes in children's literature, prominent families of Montevallo, continuing education, money, evolution versus creationism, women of the world, the last 5 decades, the arts, social concerns, medical issues, censorship, teenage pregnancy, and literacy. In February 1999, members of the study club attended the first play performed at Montevallo High School's new theater called Mixed Nuts. The theme for the final program in 1989-1999 was Toward the Millennium, A Glance Back. It was presented by Mildred Orr and was focused on innovations in literature and the arts. In 1994, The Christmas party was hosted at Flower Hill by UN President Robert McChesney and his wife Lorraine. And in the 1990s, we studied such topics as great composers, notable first ladies, rhythm and blues, Fairhope, Southeastern Indian beadwork and clothing, the Free State of Winston, Alabama folk art, Alabama trails, Alabama cooks, holiday family traditions, petals from the past, architecture, dance, authors of Montevallo, and technology of the future. The 1999-2000 club year ended in May 2000. The year's theme was talking about our town. In the new millennium, officers were Lois Doyle, Lorraine McChesney, Susan Fulmer, and Mildred Orr. In 2002, club members visited the Birmingham Museum of Art and lunched at the Terrace Cafe. The 2003 study club year ended in May with a meeting at the home of Jean Lightfoot. Members made plans for a 70th anniversary celebration to be held in the fall. Despite early plans to hold a 70th anniversary celebration in November 2003, the event took place in April 2004 at Flower Hill. The 70th anniversary made the papers, with writer Judy Hayes saying, "Hats and gloves may be out, but Montevallo Study Club members' community service and intellectual enrichment have never gone out of style, not in 70 years." Pictured are Georgine Watson, Jean Lightfoot, Lorraine McChesney, and Caroline Scott. In 2006, the study club studied not only the novel The Secret Lives of Bees, but lived the life of bees as well. And here's some candid photos from 2009. I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of those faces. In the 2000s, we studied such topics as the centennial of the city of Montevallo, notable physicians of Montevallo, churches of Montevallo, the influence of the University of Montevallo, schools of Montevallo, and the history of Montevallo. And this year, the Montevallo Study Club celebrates 90 years. Be done.
Thank you very much. I think we're all quite aware of the legacy of highly educated women who have lived in Montevallo for 90 years and probably even longer than that. Those of us who are guinea pigs in the so-called laboratory school here have lots of contact with these women who had impressive degrees from very impressive universities across the United States. And I think the community has benefited from this atmosphere that's permeated the town all these years. And we're all products of that too. So I think the presentation we've just seen just reinforces this great legacy that we have of bright, intelligent, well-educated, and dedicated female citizens. So thanks for doing this for us and for dressing up. And we're really glad to have you tell your story to us today. So.